You know, the deeper I dive into SCORN lore, the more I begin to realize, man, such a horrific fate couldn't have happened to a nicer group of people. And if you haven't detected the highest level of sarcasm with that one, then I have no idea what to do. The Polish people, which appear to be former humanity, have clearly gotten lost in the sauce in a big way. As we have discussed in my last episode covering the Moldmen, which is a horrific enough fate for any sentient being to suffer through, the Homunculi are not any different in terms of the hardships their side of the species endured. As connected in the initial video, it appears that there is some form of caste system that has developed within humanity that allows for the Polish people to look upon the others there that they have created as less than themselves, allowing for them to be used like a form of fuel or even food in some instances for the simple elevation of consciousness, as it is stated. But the question remains, what are the homunculi? Where do they come from? What were they used for? And why do the Polish people have such a massive oversight that they armed these things and then clutched their pearls when they rebelled? Well, let's discuss all that in today's episode, covering them from the game SCORN. Well, first, this episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. You know what's really annoying? Paying for subscriptions. But you know what's even more annoying than that? Trying to use something one time, like forever ago, that requires you to sign up for a free 7-day trial and then auto bills you every month for the rest of your life because you completely forgot about it. With Rocket Money, this is a thing of the past. Rocket Money is the all-in-one personal finance app that helps you manage subscriptions, lowers bills, and make a custom budget as well as grow your savings all in one place. Personally, I have been using Rocket Money since about 2023, linking my bank account to Rocket Money to kind of keep an eye on outgoing money and then identify subscriptions, alerting me to payments coming up. I have canceled so many money drainers because of this, it is absolutely unreal. As a natural result of this, you can save money and even lower your monthly bills by having Rocket Money negotiate for you. From internet service to phone bills, they do it all. So if you're ready to take back your finances today, then go to rocketmoney.com/Roanoke Gaming and get started for free. All right, let's get back to it. But before moving on, I need your help. Go into your wallet and give you those wacky numbers up front, followed by the crazy okay, but for real, I want to thank you guys for watching. I'm attempting to hit 1.25 million subs in 2025, so if you guys can help me get towards that goal, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, without you guys, none of this would even be possible, so I do appreciate the support that you have shown. Check out Roanoke Tales for cryptids and true crime stuff, where I will go look for the Michigan Dog Man if that channel hits 1 million by 2027. And also check out Discord for movies that we watch that then end up here. Links for both in the description. So I believe, like all good stories, as usual, we have to start from the beginning, because it's entirely possible not everyone who has stumbled across this video in this hellscape that is known as the YouTube algorithm has played SCORN before, but is interested in what it's even about, or what I'm even referring to, or if I'm just some cracked out former scientist talking about nonsense. So without rehashing the same video over and over again, might I suggest checking out my video a few weeks back that discusses SCORN a little more in depth and goes over the Polish people, and kind of seeing how, ridiculous their entire being is. I also have another discussing the invention known as the Moldmen, which highlights, good lord, they are all busted as all get out concerning ethics. But here's a quick rundown. Humanity has lost its collective mind. Thanks for watching. To touch on the level of insanity humanity has engaged in, you have to understand the concept of moving the needle, or as it's better known, the boiling frog theory. The boiling frog theory states that if you put a frog in room temperature water and then slowly raise the temperature over time by like 1 degree per hour, let's say, the frog will eventually succumb to the heat of the boiling water, as it will not recognize it's actively being boiled alive. In other words, people in a society may not recognize a threat until it's too late, if those threats come gradually enough. A concession made here, a new thing there, it may be questionable, but surely it cannot lead to anything worse. Over time, if you compared like 100 years of history, you'd see a stark contrast and then wonder how things got so bad. However, people existing within that environment only really see it as maybe raising it to, say, like 1 degree per decade. In a lifetime, seemingly not much has changed, but over a long enough time, horrific events would take place under the guise of, well, that's just how it's always been done. Sure, it's a little different now, but that's just how it is. And thus, you have SCORN. As I hypothesized, based on the people of Polis, we are talking about humanity existing potentially several millions, if not hundreds of millions of years into the future. Looking at Earth, either the people of Polis have built their city specifically in a desert, Earth was destroyed by some cataclysmic event, or enough time has passed that the sun has actually entered its red giant phase and become so luminous that the oceans of Earth have boiled away, all plant life has ceased to be able to grow, and even the sky has changed colors. which are all expected to take place in reality. Now, it's quite impressive humanity has existed for as long as it has, if this is the case, but it appears a tipping point was reached at some particular point in time. If we have not figured out death or how to leave the solar system in a billion years, if our species is even still around at that point, I could understand the frustration, because seemingly it appears as though we would never figure it out, and it would always be a horrifying mystery that it is today, at least concerning death. So it appears humanity in the far-flung future kind of feels the same way. But apart from gene alteration to themselves, as made mention in my original video covering SCORN, it appears humans began trying their hands at the creation of life concerning other bodies, but the issue was our own genetics appear to have been used as a basis for this creation. And so, helpers, so to speak, were the first to appear to have been created. To this end, the moldmen would spring up, which were used to run the machinery and power the city. Now, make of that what you will, but it appears the literal physical biomass of these creations were needed. So horrible fates awaited all of them. But over time, it appears the process continued and may have continued to be refined, at least to a degree. As humanity continued altering their own bodies to become the people of Polis with translucent skin and an extra set of bone growth to protect the neck, I believe this was, again, it kind of goes back to the 1 degree, or not really 1 degree, but the boiling frog method, oh, I'm gonna change myself just a little bit here, and then a little bit here, and then you just completely lose what you're supposed to be. Anyhow, other forms of life were experimented on to serve a purpose beyond just sustaining their technology and helping them to keep things kind of running smoothly. The homunculi were born out of this need to help humanity obtain a new level of consciousness, which was something they hadn't done before. It is not entirely known why exactly these creatures that most definitely stem from human DNA had to be congealed into what they are, but there were very clear effects and desires born out of their creation that would allow for humanity to once again taste the joys of accomplishment and the sting of rebellion. I mean, that is a fact of life. The homunculi are creatures that do not come from the Genesis wall or from the pits that hold the random amalgamation of tissue that then go on to bear the moldmen. Instead, the homunculi are created within labs that were built for very specific purposes. These labs appear to be available to most, if not all, of the denizens of Polis. Being grown in the labs themselves, they are said to kind of help the people achieve a higher level of consciousness for a time. But the reality is, it was a bygone technology that would ultimately backfire on them. But also the question has to be asked, higher level of consciousness for a time? Just smoking that Zaza. That's right! I know the terminologies of the Gen Z. So with many people being encouraged to create these things, their numbers would continue to rise. However, as they developed, it's likely they were not initially encased in a container, but instead allowed to develop naturally. However, to this end, it would become completely apparent to the Polis people that this was not a pleasantry that should be allowed to continue. Their ultimate purpose was to be eaten by the people as they produced a neurochemical of sorts that allowed for them to essentially get high as all get out. Now, as you might imagine, the homunculi were not really all that jazzed about this arrangement, and it's mainly because of their own neurological networks. When the homunculi first came into being, they are quite unlike the moldmen who could be found around for their entire lifespan, but never really achieved full sapience. Their own brains appear to be stunted, at least concerning the moldmen, in several ways that allows for them to be directed and not really understand the horrific purposes in which they were created for. The homunculi are not afforded this blissful ignorance as their brains are actually the purpose for which they were created. The homunculi, when formed in the lab, are fully sapient from the time they open their eyes. They understand the world around them, they understand the Polis people, and they understand what their ultimate fate is. As they develop, they will hit a point where they have grown beyond their usefulness and they will be outright consumed by the people as something of a delicacy in order to elevate their consciousness, at least for a little while. This will seem to suggest that there is a chemical that is naturally produced in their bodies that actually helps the people achieve this, though it's just as likely it has to do with the homunculi brain as well, if not entirely. My reasoning on this is that the body, or at least if the body produced this chemical, then there would really be no need for a brain to be as developed as it is, as this could later cause problems, like a rebellion, so to speak. And not to mention, it actually does, according to the lore. So the brain must be integral to producing this chemical. So what chemical is it likely to be? Well, judging by the fact that the neurons are necessary, which creates a creature with a fully functional brain at the moment it comes into being, I would tend to stick to the lines that this creature is actually probably producing a massive quantity of GABA. But what is GABA?
Yo, GABA, GABA!
Its actual name is gamma aminobutyric acid, which is created primarily in the neurons, and this acts as a primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, which means it will naturally calm down neural activity. It plays a fairly crucial role in regulating brain activity, but if enough of it builds up in the brain, this can actually create a euphoric-like sensation within your body and have a calming effect on you as well. This euphoria can translate into what most of us would call a buzz or being high. So you're probably asking, okay, so they create these creatures just to get high. Yes, they do. There was no way to form a synthetic version of this that wouldn't rebel. There was no way to, make an animal do this so that it's not as horrific. Of course, then again, they probably look at the homunculi like they're animals, so it really didn't matter. It's just like how we eat chickens, right? What is it, 74 billion chickens a year get eaten? I mean, don't get me wrong, I eat chicken all the time for like this absolutely mid physique. So I'm not like, oh my God, they're eating the chickens. Like chicken's good. Chicken tastes real good. Anyhow, it's just, that's a lot of chickens. So anyways, back to my point. You're asking, okay, so they create these creatures to get high. That's literally their whole purpose. It all goes back to the question of ethics for humanity at this stage of the game. At some point in the past, humanity would create the homunculi for the specific purpose of creating this neurotransmitter. However, it may have been discovered that you couldn't just create a sheet of neural tissue to produce this much GABA, or maybe even synthetic GABA just didn't have the same kick. Instead, you need a living, breathing creature. At first, it may have been a question of, well, let's just place them in a vegetative state. But as demand continued to rise concerning the homunculi, the vegetative state would be abandoned because it was possibly too expensive, or just not worth it considering what the fate was going to be. And then maybe you likely even had free-range homunculi. As this continued, these free-range homunculi would go on to rebel, which would create a bit of a problem. At some point, enough of these creatures being sapient and seeing what was happening to them would probably elect, hey, let's just not be eaten. It is unknown at first if maybe they tried a bit of diplomacy or if it was just outright fighting on small scales, but a war would erupt between the homunculi and the denizens of Polis. This would spell disaster for the homunculi, but not due to their lack of trying. Being that they were individuals with literal sapience, the ideas on how things should go eventually caused a division within their own ranks, which would become a problem. The homunculi, while able to think, rationalize, and have a solid reason for wanting to rebel, did in fact put the hurt down on the people of Polis. Many would fall in the ensuing fighting that took place for several different reasons, the main one being that there is no waste in Polis. This is what kind of affected, or at least allowed them to even fight back in the first place. While free-range homunculi likely existed at some point in time, it was probably discovered early on that they could be a bit disgruntled about their fates, and so they would be confined to containers that would severely deform their bodies. Like the moldmen being placed in the shells for storage that would then alter them physically, homunculi were placed within these glass containers that caused their limbs to not form properly, but left enough room for their heads to expand, allowing over time for their juicy, delicious brains to continue to develop and build up the GABA that the people of Polis desired. So before moving on to the confrontation and the lore associated with that, let's take a look at their physiology and just how absolutely jacked up this is. Starting with the feet, interestingly enough, in some artwork, they do appear to have digitigrade structuring of their legs, indicating that their genome has been highly tampered with, and actually other genes have been added over time for one reason or another, changing the physical structuring of the skeleton from a pure human skeleton to a homunculi skeleton. The literal definition of homunculi being a miniature fully formed human has now kind of started steering more towards the idea that it's a combination of human and some other creature. Others, however, appear to have the standard plantigrade structuring, but they have more claw-like protrusions where their toes would be. Moving up, a pale skin covers their body on their small limbs, which would not, I don't think, be physically strong enough to really support their weight from the looks of it. Basically, everything is atrophied. As we get to their abdomen and thoracic region, their body is ribbed with large veins and arteries as well as fat stores, taking on a look that their bodies were not able to really have enough real estate to grow. As a result, everything just kind of stacked on top of each other, and it makes them look completely deformed. Their arms are skinny with just a few claw-like fingers, but in some artwork, interestingly enough, one of their hands may have 2 fingers while the other may have 3. Their heads are quite bulbous, very likely the size of a full-grown human's, as their brain is the most desirable aspect of their creation, given the chemicals housed within. Their eyes are beady and glow red, and this could be for the simple reason that they contain the tapetum lucidum, which is the reflective kind of tissue behind the retina in like cats and dogs and all that. That's what reflects back. But this is in the back of their eyes, and it reflects the light when looking directly at them, except it takes on a red appearance. This entire process has severely and horrifically warped the bodies of the homunculi, but this rounds us back to the rebellion. The Polis people, whether by their hubris or inability to predict natural consequences, would allow for the homunculi to pilot bodies. Again, going back to the idea that nothing is ever wasted, any denizen that fell from maybe a natural end of life or otherwise, or possibly couldn't have been saved by utilizing the limbs or organs of a mold man, they were dismembered, and the homunculi were allowed to put together these pieces to form a literal meat mech of sorts that allowed them to make up for their statures and inability to move. Now, this was stupid for several reasons on the people of Polis's part. First, it may have been believed that the homunculi were totally cool with being eaten. No idea where they get that line of thinking. Second, they may have thought because the bodies were gone, maybe their technology wouldn't work. And I mean gone as in like they've expired. But again, no idea where they would have gotten that line of thinking. It doesn't appear that they actually put that in their technology in the slightest. Or maybe third, they could have thought maybe the homunculi were too stupid to understand the situation, sort of like with the mold men, and so it was an eventuality never planned for. Again, really, really stupid thinking on the part of Polis, but it just kind of shows humanity never change, baby. It is kind of our thing to not plan for things for the future, as long as we're getting use out of it now. USA. But regardless of their line of thinking, the homunculus would continue aiding the Polis people in their initial trials while also putting together the meat mechs, which was allowable by the higher ups, I guess, in this caste system that had formed. A tipping point was reached where enough of the homunculi were in these mechs that they could rebel, and rebel they did. Plunging the planet into a confrontation, the homunculi would aggressively fight back against their creators, utilizing the same weapons and countermeasures that the denizens had. All because they just spliced together the bodies that had expired, giving them the ability to fight with the weapons that the higher caste had. Now, a lot of people tend to think that you need the parasite in order to use weapons, but that's not actually true. The parasite helps the second protagonist, but clearly the first protagonist, who was very likely the person who became the parasite, had no issues using the stun gun in any capacity, and likely could have used more weapons had he not drowned in the questionable thick white goo later on. So it would appear the weapons in-game are not reliant on the parasite in order to be used, but really reliant on the Polis people's own genetic sequences, which is actually a great idea as nobody else could use your stuff. And I believe I watched something on this not too long ago. Well, not too long ago, a decade ago. So, wow, 10 years flies fast. Anyways, it was basically kind of trying to figure out how we could put transponders in American force multipliers, essentially, which would stop anybody else from using it and only an American soldier could use it, or Marine, or seaman. Basically, I know, there's a bunch of different ways to call everybody, but basically making sure that you had to be American to use it. So, how this engagement went down completely is an unknown, but it seemed like they had enough success in fighting that other ideologies were allowed to flourish, which means enough time had to have passed. And as this time passed, divisions continued to form. What this was likely hinged upon the question of, do you eradicate the creators or do you leave some? And this may indicate that even though the water was absolutely boiling in society at this point, there may have been at least some Polis denizens sympathetic to the plight of the homunculi. Like any war, atrocities would be committed, and some homunculi probably opted for eradication, while the other side wanted to just get rid of the idea of being eaten. And this would lead to infighting amongst the homunculi. All the while, elevating consciousness and shirking off your biological form was still being studied by the denizens, which I think allowed for what happens at the end. Ultimately, this infighting would cause the homunculi to falter in strength, and they were eventually overwhelmed once more by the Polis people. Interestingly, even still, after this was done, the homunculi were allowed to return to the mechs that they created that likely aided them in their initial confrontation, but they were far fewer in numbers. After this event had reached its conclusion, the homunculi were defeated and other methods would likely have been developed. It may have been something as simple as only the homunculi who had passed would be eaten now, or in this case, placed in containers and squished for their juices, but I rather doubt this to be the case. I mean, it could be. It could be it's like, okay, well, we won't just eat you guys now. We'll wait until you expire, right? Maybe that created some sort of truce. I'm not really 100% certain, but interestingly though, one of the things is if you approach the temple of Percy in the playpen and try to restart the mandroid and femdroid, I don't know what it's called, created to basically carry you to the elevated consciousness area, you'll find that when you go and awaken one of the homunculi that's already passed within their container, you go and you juice them, and then you grab the next one. And with the second one, this one it's just on sight. It will trigger a fight because as it sees you, it already hates you, but doesn't hate you. Anyways, defeating the mech that it has created, you go and you juice that one as well and then steal its weapon. And this is interesting as the mechs are still able to use Polis countermeasures. So as you awaken the third one, it's also on sight, meaning that, again, these things hate you no matter what. But what I find strange about the Polis peoples, why would they still continue even after their initial confrontation? It clearly shows these creatures are aggressive to you and anyone that looks like you. Of course, there's a twist to this. It cannot be completely ruled out that the homunculi are just aggressive to you because of the parasite that is on your back. It may not actually hate you, it just hates the parasite. You've already compromised its area, and the job of this creature is to keep this area and technology safe, and you bringing in the parasite has completely put this entire temple in jeopardy. Either way, overcoming them allows you to puree all of them and then receive the elevated consciousness that you seek. Interestingly, I do also wonder if when the android is carrying you into this other area, see how it's like stabbing you continuously or just stupid things like that? I don't really understand why it's doing that. But possibly, maybe you're being injected with the neurochemicals from the homunculi that you have overcome, and this actually allows you to reach this area. So it's kind of like a combination of an unknown technology coupled with a brain that is in a euphoric state, and then once crossing over, you stay in this permanent state of consciousness, as this is evidently elevation. And this would make sense as the technology is going to continue building upon technology, and the homunculus are just kind of step one of shirking your biological form. So anyhow, the homunculi are creatures that are not created from the Genesis wall like the actual Polis people or in the vats like the moldmen, but instead were created in a lab. They appear to be a necessary middle step in elevating your consciousness, and this may have been discovered by accident at some point in history, which was then built upon over time, being necessary to push the denizens' minds to a higher state where their physical body can be left behind, thus freeing them from the assured death all their ancestors, you and me, prior had experienced. Ultimately though, getting alley-ooped by your creators, by being eaten by them, is not something the homunculi would take lying down. Though the rebellion would fail, ultimately they would be the last on Earth, and they could take it over, I suppose, but they're really just kind of doomed to stay there until it's inevitably engulfed either by the sun, if it gets to that size, or blown up later by the sun when it goes supernova. Left behind by their creators in a callous way, they absolutely still seem pissed about it. But anyhow, I want to hear what you guys think. A lot of this game is left open to interpretation, as the lore is not really there's not much out there. So it's more of a creative endeavor to sort of talk about this, as much as it is a biological one. But with that, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be great of you. And subscribing is also baller, as again, 2025, 1.25, let's get it. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke, Tales, and Games link in the description. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronauts, Army, and Tristan Kessick. Thank you guys for the awesome support. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicists, Death Dancer and Feather. Thank you guys as well. And to my scientists, Dakota23, Invictus Echo, Metric System, and Official Texan. I do appreciate y'all's support. And to the rest of my patrons, you guys didn't have to help, but you do, and it's awesome, and I thank you for it. It is always appreciated and never expected. But all right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.